feel of like a 1970s, early 80s public television talk show, doesn't it? Like,
Merv Griffin.
yeah, Merv, there we go.
Don't sell yourself short, Jeff.
Yeah. I did back in Tallahassee, WFSU, got involved in one. It was this public affairs programming thing because, and I agreed to do it for a while because the first time I went there, having a fundraiser at the station that night, and they had a bar and all this food. And I thought they had that every time. So I said, yeah, I'll do this every 2 weeks or whatever. And I went back and there was no bar, And after my friend said, they said, Jeff, the first time you were pretty good on that show, but after that you were really dull. So things are never what they seem in the world of media. So this is a question for both of you. What from your company's perspective or your perspective on your company, what do you think are the most important technological developments for your company's business plans as of we're here in the year of the dog 2018 looking forward? What's the, and that doesn't be 1, 2, 3, whatever you think. Christian, I'll let you go first.
Sure, thanks, Jeff. I think there's really two main drivers, technological-wise, for Comcast in the in the near to medium term, and I'm sure this won't come as a surprise to anyone in the room, but I would say that the big one is probably DOCSIS 3.1. We've really turned into a broadband company, hence the broadband panel. It's the core of our business now. We're still have our hands in just about everything, but when you come down to it, it's the broadband business that's driving the growth and the continued success of Comcast. So the new DOCSIS 3.1 standard, which allows gigabit download speeds today on the traditional hybrid fiber coax network, is just a game changer. It enables a great level of service and sometime soon probably even symmetrical gigabyte speeds. Does require all new CPE and new head-end electronics. However, given the size of our network, that's not as significant of an investment as some other things might be. And that leads me to my second point, is that despite being able to offer the DOCSIS 3.1 on the current network, we are getting capacity constrained on the current engineered network. So Comcast has announced a $50 billion CapEx spend over the next 5 years, roughly $10 billion a year, which obviously is a very large number. And a lot of what that's going to go into is Fiber Deep initiative, which again is something you guys are probably very familiar with. Ours is going to have 0 actives in the coax plant. So what that means is we need to get within 1,000 feet of every home passed in order to do that. So as you can imagine, given the current state of the network, which is very nice, but we're going to have a significant investment and ramp up to get that done. And it's starting as of today, and we're doing it sort of in a phased approach throughout our markets in the country, depending on which are the most capacity constrained at the moment. So I think both those two factors are really, going to drive the future of Comcast.
Okay, two follow-ups. How much of your customer base is covered by DOCSIS 3.1 approximately right now?
It's about 80% currently, with all the way up to 100 by the end of this calendar year. So it's been a pretty quick rollout, all things considered, which is great.
No, time passes faster as you get older, but that surprises me. That one surprised me. I didn't expect that. So now, and you're probably going to say, well, I just said that, but I want you to repeat again the Fiber Deep. You're going to go within 1,000 feet with fiber of all homes passed?
That is correct.
Every customer, not homes passed, excuse me, every customer. With everybody, think about that for a second. How much different is that than just doing fiber all the way to the home then?
It's not that different. And, I don't think there's been an announcement as far as a long-term plan for what the next network after that is. But I think, logic might lead you to make your own conclusions there.
Okay, yeah. So Claire, same question to you for CenturyLink, maybe a different answer, but technological developments and also you've heard from Comcast, so in comparison or however you want to phrase that for you guys.
Well, CenturyLink has really undergone a transformation with the Level 3 merger, and really to be more broadband focused than we were before. For the last few years, CenturyLink has been trying to push, broadband out into the more rural communities with the CAF funding, and that continues to be a place that they focus. We're focusing CAP spend. Our new CFO Sunit Patel gave a talk a couple weeks ago about how he was much more interested in. Okay. He was much more interested in capital spend in high density areas. He was looking at trying to do fiber to the home and more of those types. So it's a transition. We're moving away from although we still have this obligation through the CAF funding to provide these services out into the rural areas, but I think we're looking at going towards more of a highly dense, really getting more into broadband in those places where it's reasonable financially to do it.
So it sounds like you got to the fork in the road, and as Yogi Berra says, took it. It sounds like both directions.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a hedge.
That's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah. But I guess that kind of makes sense given your geographic footprint and background and everything. You can't really abandon that. You do serve a lot of relatively, whatever you want to call it, rural America. And that's obviously a different strategy, and you can't. I would assume there's all sorts of reasons that you. I'm not saying it's lip service or anything, but that you can't abandon that, right? That you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's some leftover regulation and
Yeah.
things like that.
Commitments
we have
and obligations. Yeah.
to continue to provide, and we've also taken the CAF funds, and that's in 33 states, and that's obligating us to provide certain speeds within a certain time span, and those speeds, when I hear come to a conference like this and I hear people talk, those speeds sound more and more irrelevant. But when you're talking about 10 down and 1 up, and while other people are talking about 5 gig other places,
Yeah.
it's.
Well, it's a broad market. I'm asking this question. What is, and I guess there's an FCC one, I don't know, but for downstream, what is broadband? Is it 25 megabits per second and above? Is that it, or what is it? What do you guys think it is? Should it be called 50? Should it be 25? I don't know if it's 10. That doesn't make sense. 25?
Currently called 25.
Yeah. So
I like 10.
10. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I get it. How much? And if you don't, but how much of your customer base do you cover 25 and above, though? Do you think?
Not very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really probably less than 15, 20%.
Yeah, and I think that just goes to show sort of some of the inherent advantages the cable carriers have had just with the way their networks are set up as we're kind of the opposite. It's we have 75% of our customers currently on 100 megabits per second or above. So it's a very significant amount, and I would imagine the entire footprint would be over 25.
So in a place, say like Denver or Seattle, where you have an urban market, though, different story, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and we do provide fiber to the home in some. I think I looked like 15 different markets, but it's very small.
Yeah.
It's a very small percentage of our total customer base.
But you do, and you're probably going to do more.
We're probably going to do more. I think we've got new direction at the top, and I think we're going to be seeing more of that. Our capital spend go in that direction rather than in the rural areas.
So from a, that's from a technology perspective, your approach, and just what about from general market perspective, which is it's a broader question. We could talk about that all day, and don't worry, we're not. But your what do you think your company's greatest marketplace challenges are, and things are moving so fast? And I think we ask this question every year, and to generally the panel's credit, I kind of thought they'd say kind of the same thing every year, but everybody's always had kind of the updated perspective. So I'd like to just kind of get that perspective. A lot of this conference is I think it's from three directions. It's marketplace, it's technology, and then perhaps environmental, which is regulatory and politics and all that, and then they converge, right? So from the marketplace perspective, biggest challenges, opportunities, whatever you want to comment on.
From a marketplace perspective, a lot of our customers don't have a lot of options as far as, so when we go into some more the high density areas, we're looking at gigabit, and I think you're going to have that. But we've got kind of a wide ranging market, a lot of different customers. We were trying to bundle services for a while. Obviously, voice is going away. Nobody wants voice, but we were doing Prism, which was a video service, but the margins on that were just so small that we're kind of abandoning going in that direction and looking at more over the top type of services. So,
Christian, what about you guys?
Yeah, I think from our perspective, it's probably the obvious answer is the over the top is probably the biggest challenge to legacy cable. Obviously, Netflix has continued to grow at an incredible rate. I have some stats here. In our network, our average user or median user uses 130 gigabytes a month, which is up 50% year over year. So, I mean, looking at the bandwidth charts is just a crazy amount, which, again, is just driving the amount of investment that we need to put into the network for over-the-top to companies to poach our video customers. So it's kind of a self reinforcing trend that's not a good thing at all. But I think Comcast has been really, really innovative to see that coming and make some really smart investments to mitigate the damage from that. Our X1 platform has turned out to be extraordinarily valuable and offer great sort of suite of offerings to our customers. It's reduced customer churn significantly. It increases ARPU just by talked earlier about advertising. The targeted marketing that we can do with the X1. It knows what you watch. It'll suggest a similar movie that you can order on pay-per-view, or it knows if you've ordered an MMA fight before. It's gonna put the advertisements for the pay-per-view special coming up this Saturday or something like that. So I think there's been a number of moves our senior management has made to get out in front of that. Probably the number one even is now Netflix is integrated into our X1 platform. So you can fire up your cable box and watch Netflix through it, which is something I think if you had said a couple years ago, people would have called you crazy, and I probably would have too. And it seemed very counterintuitive when it was announced, but I think it's been a really smart move. Instead of trying to stop the incoming train, hop on board and hope to offer other reasons for the customers to stay, which is what we're doing with the X1. Is just the integrated user experience is a good thing. So if you're happy with all these services, and even if you're accessing competitors' products through it, if we still have that connection in the home, it drives value.
Yeah, along those lines, and just this could be answered. I don't know if you guys have the stats or just relatively, but right now, do you know or have an idea how much of your customer base, say, is currently bundled all the way? I'll call it video, data, and telephony. To an idea about what percentage?
I'm not sure on the triple play bundle, but at least it's over 70% of our customers take at least two services. which I think is probably the metric that Comcast is more concerned with. I think as Claire mentioned, voice is kind of an afterthought at this point. I think we're even making more investments into the smart home and security field. We're over 1 million customers in that regard, and they continue to sort of bring all of that together to offer, a full range of home automation, everything else, as Steve's beloved Alexa does when he tells it to good night and turns off his lights. Everything else, we're going to have that integration with our X1 voice remote and say good night, and it'll turn off your lights. It'll lock the doors if you have smart lock. It'll set your alarm to the night setting. All of that, just you could be sitting in bed watching TV and have that happen. So,
Large percentage of our customers don't have those options because we are so much rural. So I don't know that I can say what the percentage is, but I mean, we're their option. We're their option, and what can we do for them? And the more we can do, the more we can do. But we're also limited by the copper wire infrastructure.
Sure, but you can provide those. You provide all those services. They're there. So, what about data only? How are you looking there? Because obviously, you can, you're going over the top, but you can go over the top and still be on Comcast or Charter Spectrum. So so what your growth in data only, or your percentage of data only? What can you give us this kind of perspective on that?
I'm not sure of the exact percentage
Yep.
of data only. However, it's definitely a growing segment of the market, and I think we view it as an opportunity. Obviously, we like to have you signed up for all of our services, but we're going to continue to offer competitive speeds and pricing to customers who only want the broadband, and then hopefully use that connection to offer them other services that they find valuable.
Yeah, I wouldn't know percentage-wise, but I would
Yeah.
assume pretty much the same. I mean, if a customer is a customer, whether they're landline using
Yeah.
landline only or data only.
Yeah, and one thing I noted on the earnings call earlier this week from Comcast was that the ARPU for internet-only customers is steadily rising. So that is an opportunity there as there's continued pressure on the video side. If you have a premium product on the data side, you can drive additional revenue from that.
Yeah, hence, additional investment in fiber. And I guess the point is, Claire, for you guys, I mean, also in the areas where you can do it, I'm assuming by what you just said that it's not just a legacy, quote, cable company that the quote, legacy telco would pursue data-only customers in those markets where that's viable, correct?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So those options are going to be there for all the carriers. Interestingly enough, and this is just something maybe you've read it, everybody wonders, about Google Fiber, and it would appear from what I've read that they may be looking at a transition toward more of a data-only offering. Their percentage of data-only. We looked at Austin, for example, and I don't remember what the number is. You can find it. It's public. Is pretty high. Is higher than I think it's probably around 50% or more. So it's going to be obviously higher. And it again, from what I've read, that seems to be what they're looking at is a viable alternative. And we've talked about, I don't know how many years ago at this conference, but we talked about a statement made. There's somebody from Verizon here, but by a Verizon executive that Fios was going to be technology proof. And there was a lot of ridicule of that, but I think the point was, fiber to the home proved very expensive. It was, by what's happened, obviously difficult to sustain that business because of the expense, and there was ridicule, but the point was probably pretty good that from what everybody said, you still need that fiber, and there's more and more investment in it. So what was maybe taken is this business investment is not subject to being, tanked by technological change. I mean, true, it had nothing to do with technological change that made it difficult. It was strictly the cost. But just personal opinion, I kind of think that's right and still the case. I mean, would you guys agree? I mean,
Oh yeah, yeah. If you got that, that's our constant battle is that last mile. That the services we can provide depend on how close our customers are to the other equipment, and fiber kind of solves that issue.
Yeah, totally agreed.
I mean, the investment, even again, I'll talk about Google Fiber. If you look and say, people say, oh, well, we read that they're pulling back or halting new customers, but again, you go and look at their 10K or something, their investment would still be at a level that you would consider significant numbers. So it seems that regardless of the company structure, that you have a broad array of providers, only two of which are here today. But by the way, I think Charter actually. Sometimes we wonder, well, who views this? But Charter is actually watching this live, so hopefully you can be here next year on the stage. But the investment it remains substantial, and that doesn't appear to be anything that's going to change in the near future. Let's switch gears a little bit. A lot of you out here, are oriented toward, ad valorem tax issues relating to broadband industry. So I'd like to ask both of you, just currently, because this has changed a lot over time compared to our first discussions on this issue years ago at this conference. But what do you see as the major issues in your positions and responsible for your company's property taxes that your company and your industry faces now? You can say top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however you want to do it. Claire?
Well, I think parity is a big issue.
It's still an issue.
It's still an issue. Yeah, the legacy ILEC companies are assessed state utility or as a public utility, and there's a higher tax burden. And if unfortunately a lot of our broadband assets and services are going into those legacy telephone companies, which put us at a disadvantage from a tax standpoint. We've pursued some legislative changes. We've gotten some things through. We got a legislative change in Tennessee this year that at least takes us down to what the IXCs are. We're no longer assessed at 55%. We're assessed at 32%. We're getting out in New Jersey. We're getting out of being the only personal property taxpayer in the whole state. I think Verizon and Centurylink are the only two personal property taxpayers in the state of New Jersey. And that's because we're becoming less and less. Once we go below 50% of the provider in there, that tax goes away. But there's a disparity there, and it's costly to us, and it puts us at a disadvantage.
And I think the answer is going to be yes, but do you think that additional cost does rise to the level that it impedes investment?
That it impedes investment?
Yeah, that's the question. That would be your best policy argument, right? For parity, say, look, this is something you could say, well, it's equal protection issue. That's been tried a couple places. But if you get to the point and you want attention that this is actually the parity issue and the additional burden on these companies because of classification, the cost actually prevents us from doing, just what you legislators actually want us to do.
Yes, it does, and we try to make that case that our legislative affairs people will go in and try and negotiate a more favorable tax treatment and with a guarantee of investment. I've seen them do that in Arizona, and it's constant. We deal with it more at a legislative level rather than litigative. That just doesn't work. We've tried that.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. When you pay the kind of tax, you've got the kind of tax burden that we have. It's not just, I mean, it's significant for us, but it's also a huge source of revenue that the bottom just can't drop out of. So we have to work with the states on that level too.
Yeah, it's incremental. So you have made progress in that regard.
I feel like we have.
Yeah, and I think that's valid. I mean, that the parity is that's a real issue, and there are all sorts of and again, I think at this conference and others years ago, there was sort of a pointing back and forth, but I think that atmosphere's changed, and certainly, Christian, I'll ask from Comcast perspective. I mean, it's perceived that because of classification of cable, except in one place now, as locally assessed, and generally, or maybe that's, well, we'll see. It's not over, but as quote locally assessed and subject to cost and considered generally more favorable. I'd say that parity is not your greatest concern, but I would say also, from what I understand, Comcast or those that may be on the more favorable side of it, you recognize that it isn't, valid issue of concern. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, then, and the big difference there is obviously just the assessment methodology between local and state assessment. The state assessment tends to use either an income approach or some other approach that ends up not properly removing all intangibles, or some other way where the value ends up a lot higher than if you just use a simple cost approach. So I think that is a favorable thing for the cable companies to be locally assessed.
Well, and some of them, I mean, the laws are different. They're allowed to tax intangibles
Right.
if you're
Yeah, that too.
if you're a telco, and not
Yeah.
if you're a cable company.
Right.
And I think there was a point in time where a part of my company, before it was a part of my company, was trying to push that point, I guess, in the opposite direction of
Right.
what I'd like to.
Right.
I'd prefer to see us working together. At this point, there's no reason for the difference, putting the burden on one type of taxpayer as opposed to another.
It's just really the legacy of statutes in certain states that were written another time. And,
Right.
And that's, it puts everybody in a box, including, state officials. I mean, you're in a box, you've got your laws, and you have to work with them, right? And everybody does. And that's a point I'm glad you made it, that parity is still an issue, obviously, for the industry. For you guys, Christian, what do you see as your big challenges in the ad valorem tax?
Sure. Well, I think despite some of the advantages of local assessment, there's a lot of challenges involved with that as well. The administration alone of local taxation is very large, and it becomes very difficult en masse to really work on your values and to get to fair market value in all of your jurisdictions. When particularly in some states that are at the city or town level even, how do you fight values and sort of argue for obsolescence if you have to talk to 200 different assessors in just that state? I mean, it becomes extraordinarily difficult. And beyond that, just the education issue as well. We all sit in these conferences. We all know where the industry is going. The local assessors are assessing all types of property. They're not going to be experts on telecommunications property. So it's our job to educate them on why, certain tables may not be appropriate, or that they should be taking an obsolescence adjustment because of X, Y, or Z. And it is a large burden to fight those fights.
So I like the North Carolina solution. It didn't affect cable, but wireless at one point was assessed locally, while landline, traditional ILECs and IXCs were assessed at the state level, and they came to an agreement that they would move wireless into state assessment with a guarantee that they wouldn't be capturing intangibles. They would rely on a cost approach. And that's what they've done. So you've kind of solved your problem. They've had to recognize how they've got to move it hasn't been legislated yet, but they are trying to get us into the same category, the way the wireless companies are. at this point, so that we're not being assessed in an unequal fashion. And I would personally, I would like to see the cable companies and the legacy landline companies work together to get that. It would solve your problem. It would solve my problem.
It would. That's a really good point about North Carolina, because the other thing it does, and that's a major problem for you, Christian, and anybody in the industry, is it does, as many of you know, it codifies treatment of obsolescence, which I think is really important, because for an industry where you have just in with this, look, the more investment, the more change, the more rapid the loss in value. It's going to continue. Very difficult if you have a footprint across the country to have that appropriately recognized in all the assessment authorities, right? It's just it's a very difficult thing. And some would say, wow, North Carolina gave away the story. But it's very standard appraisal practice, you know, the way it's addressed. And it's in rules in other states, right? I mean, in most states, there's provision for how obsolescence is to be applied. There you have it codified. Now, other industries say, hey, it's just for this industry, why not for us, you know, and people can point to that. But in say this is, you know, industry perspective, but I don't think that's a bad thing. And I think if anything, it's not perfect, but is a good model, is North Carolina. It doesn't fully solve it. They're working towards solving parity, but also they said, you know, let's not stop there. Let's do address, and it doesn't guarantee anybody a certain percentage of obsolescence or anything like that. But it does provide a codified basis for it, and I think that's a big advantage. And certainly, maybe a lot of states wouldn't go there. The political culture there is you know, each is different, but I think that's a major step.
Yeah, I would agree, and we've heard similar thoughts, you know, both within the industry and from local assessors around the country. We hear it in California all the time when we present our issues to local assessors. They're just not sure what to do with us, and I think they would prefer if we were state assessed there.
They did in North Carolina. The assessors supported that. There's 100 counties in North Carolina. Yeah,
that's kind of I was surprised about that, because a lot of local assessors seem to think that they'd do better if they were in there assessing that property and not some state assessor who's given away the farm.
Or they wanted more guidance. They said, look, I got a law that says fair market value. People are beating me over the head with it, or the obsolescence is in my rules, but what can I go with? Oh, you put it in the code. I know what to do. If it's done right, then there was widespread you know, support in that state by assessment officials. Okay, we're going to shift gears one more time because it was so interesting. Got a comment, and the issue was touched on by in the last session, a cost quest, net neutrality, which I'm not a fan of the term. I mean, what we're really talking about is internet regulation, right? Net neutrality. It's a word, sounds good. I don't know what that is, but we all do know what internet regulation is, and it's coming out here and like, I'm the only person on the plane seems to read a paper news. I guess I know I'm not always older than everybody on there, but I'm the only person with like a newspaper. I still do, and I look at the Wall Street Journal, and AT&T took out a full-page ad. How many of you read that or know about it? Okay, good. Glad we're talking about this. Look, there you go. Go online and look it up. You don't have to go find a paper Wall Street Journal like I had. But they took out a full-page ad and kind of made what I would call a proclamation. And Gary, you're still here, and you can correct me because I don't want to paraphrase or speak for AT&T, but as a consumer of that, as a reader, what I got was their plea to say, look, let's take this out of I'll call it a, you know, arcane regulatory environment where you go from one side to the other when the parties change, and you've got a regulatory structure that you have to fit it into that's from, you know, from 80 years ago, 90 years ago, and you know, the whole issue needs to be addressed as a policy issue should by elected representatives and come up with something that is fair. And they also made a very strong statement that we do not, nor will we, throttle or, you know, lane charge or anything like that. That really in you know, the state of the industry now, whether you could even do that or not, or it would be effective or beneficial, is really, you know, unlikely. And it was a very strong statement. I first want to just ask Gary, don't want to put you on the spot, but if that's a fair characterization or you have anything to add, and then I'm going to ask the panel a question.
No, I think it's fair characterization. Basically, what our chairman says, it goes around the country making speeches to this, is that there needs to be some certainty. When you're spending, we spend like $23 billion a year in capital investment. You need some certainty as to what you're dealing with when you spend that kind of capital. And so that's all. So yeah, you characterized it correctly.
Thank you. I just think that's a very, very important message. Wherever you fall on this one way or the other, I think it should. It was very interesting and something that everybody should, I think, pay attention to. Christian, what about from Comcast perspective? I mean, I hadn't seen any full page ads, but has Comcast executive leadership made any similar statements, or what do we hear from Comcast on that?
Yeah, they have actually, and right when the net neutrality regulations and the Title II stuff was in the public eye, Comcast came out and publicly made the same proclamation that we don't and we're not planning on throttling services and or restricting access to non-favored players on the internet. And then just recently, Brian Roberts on the earnings call this week made a similar statement as AT&T, asking and saying that the industry is going to be focused on working with Congress to get some type of sort of common sense regulation in place that everyone can agree on to both protect consumers and to give companies certainty that regulations aren't going to change every 4 years when the political will changes or anything else.
I'd say CenturyLink probably is in that same boat. Feels the same way.
Yeah, and if this goes through the legislative process, obviously there are very large entities that are on. This is simplistic, but on quote the other side of this issue, and they'll have a chance to have their input as well, right? And so again, I think that was just refreshing to see. And with that, we have a couple of minutes. Again, we asked for questions during, none, so I'll give you one more offer for a question or comment. Carl?
Frontier used to be on a ratable basis, $18 billion market cap. Now it's $500 million market cap. Are they going to survive? I said 500 million.
Yeah.
So
It would seem to be something to be concerned about. If you look at something just on the basis of that, it would. And again, the whole story of FiOS and the acquisition, personal opinion may not, and I think it just shows that the investment and the business infrastructure required to play in the heavy fiber market is substantial, and they had a market cap of X, but that did not, was not indicative of the financial strength or the wherewithal to carry and maintain and advance something like that. I just think, again, point is, when we talked about it, fiber, $50 billion you're talking about, you're not talking, but still you're talking AT&T 2030. It's just you have to bring something to the game, and in their case, I don't know what it is at this point. That's my thought.
Yeah, and given the amount of debt that they have, I think it's gonna be an uphill battle for them to, continue to survive.
was that kudos to Verizon?
Well, the track record of Verizon is everybody that bought the property on bankrupt almost. Besides CenturyLink, there's one exception I can point out.
Timing is almost everything. Thanks so much to our panel, guys. Give the panel a hand.